Good afternoon and welcome to an election special. We did one of these on Tuesday and we've got another one for today. And this is more a look at the debrief of what happened, what we learned. And the reason for doing this is, yes, 4 years' time may seem a long way off. But by doing the work now, you're not going to have to do all of the research and trying to work out what was implied and what was suggested at the last election in 4 years' time when that's not fresh in your mind at all. So if you get the information down and take something from this one, it can help you out in 4 years. Always be thinking about the future. It's not just about looking at how you traded on the day and what you did and where you made money or not. It's about making sure that you've got something to learn from going forward. So, US election. Expectation-wise, this is what we had. And if you remember back to when I did the last rundown of this, we had blue wave was up there as the main consensus. Blue wave / a consensus of basically Biden winning whatever, and it was just a case of, did you get both a full blue wave, House and Senate, or did you get House and Senate split like this? This is now currently where we're looking likely to be going. But at some points in time, it was actually looking slightly more for the Trump result. Now, the expectation was that on the whole, this would be a risk-on play on the basis of further stimulus. This is a risk-off play on the basis of possibly a split and uncertainty about the result of the election going forward. This didn't necessarily become the case going throughout the night. This is the current results, and this is as of 8 AM this morning, UK time. So we still don't actually know the result. This was the hard bit about this election, but does give us a sense as to what to expect in future. If we get proliferation of postal voting at future elections, we could expect this to drag on for at least 24 hours after you get the first exit polls. So 264 to 214 to win now for Biden. Biden needs 6 electoral college votes to win. He is currently leading in Nevada, and these are the states that are still left to report. You've got Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina and Pennsylvania. There's enough there for Trump to win it, but Nevada is the key one. If Biden can get Nevada, which is expected, perhaps not to report too soon, we're on 98% for Georgia, we're on 95% for North Carolina. Nevada's the one furthest behind here, but that's the one that's going to tip. Of course, Biden could win any of the others, but on the whole, it's not looking the case. So this is the current situation. It looks highly likely that Biden's going to get this. All of the betting markets suggest so as well. What was interesting though on the night, and this is a really useful thing, so to take this for future, looking at betting markets. These helped quite significantly in understanding where the election was heading, and this is perhaps one of the bigger opportunities on the night. Interestingly though, not in line with what you would normally expect to happen. So I'll show you a video of this in just a moment. I'll show it pretty fast because it takes quite some time for the whole move to play out. But perhaps one of the biggest opportunities of the night was on Trump's odds actually starting to turn. So the likelihood of Trump winning starting to switch. We start off with Biden pretty much walking it. And as you start coming into the early polls, so the final betting before we start getting any news on who is winning the election, before we start getting the results, Biden gets to his extreme of 62% implied by betting markets that he's going to win. As the first results start coming in then, and sort of 2 hours or so in, we start to see a shift. Biden's odds getting longer, Trump getting shorter. We then start to see this continues, and we're still at 60 at around about 9:15. So this is around about 2:15 in the morning. We start to see a shift where Trump's actually now becoming favourite, and this accelerates to 75% chance of winning. This is after Trump takes Florida. It's now looking more likely. Now, the one thing to bear in mind with betting markets is the extremity of the swing. This isn't like a futures market where you'll get, say, the S&P can rise, it can fall. With a betting market, this is a binary thing. So you'll get the odd shift, but they are going to swing quite significantly from one side to the other. So it's not sort of an absolute correlation between the two, but starts to give some kind of indication. And what we then see is a turnaround in some of the moves that we'd already been seeing. And this is quite significant, that from a flow point of view and a technical perspective, the Donald Trump odds flip was actually an indication for the S&P to rise, perhaps more on the fact that the S&P wouldn't go down on it. And then if you were looking at this from the point of view of watching what the market's doing, trading the flow that's going on, that's where your bigger opportunity was, rather than trying to trade off the result of every single state. In terms of the Senate, this is where we're currently at with that. So this is looking pretty likely that, well, Trump's going to get 49 if North Carolina goes to the Republicans, and then you've got a runoff election, and there was 2 seats to be had in Georgia, which could well tip the Republican vote for the Senate. So this is very much running down the lines of Biden to win, Democratic House, Republican Senate. So no real change there apart from change of the president. This was the big move, and I'll bring you this up in video form so you can see the chart development throughout and how it trades up and where your opportunities are to get in at this zone down here. It's around about 55s, and then breaking through what is kind of like the middle of the range. The early stages, we start holding up here. So this is from like midnight UK, hold above 75. We use that then as resistance, and then we get back above. There was your opportunity to then play up through the highs of the day on the current day, and a continuation higher up towards levels around about 34.20. So this was the main move, but this was all on Trump's odds shifting. And as he became more favourite, you got this dip and then reverse. And it was almost a case of positions trapped, and you then get this increased flow as the market starts to turn back up. Interestingly, the S&P doesn't massively correlate with anything else in this situation. So, here we go. I'll bring you this in, and you can see here, Trump odds reflect 65% chance of winning the election. So we're starting to see Trump's likelihood of winning increasing. Here comes the drop, pricing this in, makes sense. And this, bear in mind, is 2:40 in the morning UK time. So this is that drop down into the low 30s, so the lowest point we got on the day. Then you start to see a reversal and where your opportunity comes. And you see at this point, we're getting, and you need to be aware of what the correlations are. The possibility of Trump winning, we're seeing S&P coming off, we're seeing the euro continuing its down move, gold continuing down, and T-note putting in a marginal bid. Then we start to get the turn. Once the S&P gets back up to this zone here, around 43 up to 45, this is where you can then start getting a take back of recent movement. So still hanging around down at the lows. And what I'm going to have to do is speed this up for you, because this takes around about 40 minutes to play through. And you're now starting to see S&P starting on its move back up, so around about 36s. Dollar's still strengthening. Gold still pushing down towards lows as well, but starting a little bit of a bounce. And what you'd be expecting to see here is, really, if Trump's going to win, further upside in T-note here. Everything else has correlated inversely with T-note, but instead what we're starting to see is T-note's having a marginal dip, but gold's starting to run up on the possibility of Trump winning, which would make a fair bit of sense, a risk-off type play. Dollar is still sticking around the low against the euro, and the S&P is now up into this zone. Now, on its own, just being up around about 45 wouldn't suggest it's necessarily a chance to get long. Where the bigger opportunity comes is once we start getting up through the top. Once you get out of this range up here through 55, there's the chance for the bigger move. So you see very, very thin market, obviously. And we're now starting to see gold and S&P correlating reasonably well. T-notes also starting to drop, so now you're starting to see this play come in. It's the opposite to what you would expect. Because most people are of the view that Trump winning was going to be negative, i.e. risk off. But we are now up, we're up to around about 55, we've just touched over it, so you've now got a point where, and this is perhaps where the bigger play was, the flow move in the S&P, once you get up through 55, 56, that's where the flow then really starts to come in and the move becomes directional and not then led necessarily by your view or interpretation of who's leading or probabilities of one or another winning. This is all about the turning around of positioning, the fact that the S&P has been not particularly directional, but has recently had an attempt lower, and now this positioning getting turned over and flow coming into the S&P. At the same time, we're still seeing gold on the way up, T-note on the way down, dollars losing correlation. There we go, we're through 55 now. We just put in a fair bit of pace through 55. So your next area to be looking for is back up towards 73, 75 zone. And what we're looking for now is the move to pick up pace for you to be able to get into this. And there we go, very quick up towards 75, and we now start to hold that zone. So 73, 75 starts to hold. And this is the area then to look to try and get in. And it is a case you're going to need to let it settle down. Initially, the first trade you might be thinking is buy 73, stop down towards 70, and try and stay in the move. And what you need to be very aware of when volatility picks up as it has done is that your stops will have to be bigger, but the amount you can get out of a move, it should also be much higher expectation. So what you're starting to see here, if you've been buying 73 and your stop's perhaps down at 70, we now get stopped out, and that's fine. What you need to be thinking about is if this flow continues, if the pace continues to come in here, and you get through 73, 75 zone, bearing in mind this is the kind of pivot in the middle of a range, there's your opportunity for the continuation move. So just because you're getting stopped out down here at 69 shouldn't reduce your willingness to go for the break of 75 again. You're effectively creating a 1 minute flag here, which is suggesting continuation. It's now just a case of finding that continuation, finding that break. So here we go, back up to 75, and this time you start seeing it gets up there with more pace, holds 73, and here's your chance to get in now. If you can get in around 75 now, this little flick back, there's your chance to go for it. So you get that second shot, and you have to be willing to take them. Now you're starting to see this faster move up. We've gone 75 up to 89 very, very quick. Now we're looking for the continuation move. And this is where the flow starts to pick up. Volumes are starting to build up. Delta's rising here. This is looking all good. But if you got overly focused on the result of the election and the implication of the odds, you may end up missing this type of movement. And this is a really important thing to remember. Once the market sets off in a direction, though you may have a certain interpretation of the information coming in, once the market's decided where it's going, it will get on its way there, which is exactly what's going on here. S&P up towards 95. You're seeing very, very little pullback on this now. Correlations reasonably breaking down. You're still seeing T-note coming off slightly, but really the S&P is going alone at this. Seen some pullback in gold, for example, and a bit of a drop in T-note, but S&P is the one that's really getting the move on here. And you can then start looking higher and higher up. You start to see some resistance around 95. You start to struggle there, so there's a possibility of taking something off the table as you start getting up towards overnight highs at 02. That's going to be your main target. going up towards 02, and then it's a case of levels beyond that. But you keep seeing very limited pullback now, and it will flick back to 02, 03. Yes, this is on quadruple speed, so you get a little bit more chance to execute on this, but you're seeing it's very, very quick. It has pullbacks, quick rotation as it stalls on the way back up, and then the move continues on. That's perhaps was the biggest opportunity, and where many of our traders did particularly well in waiting for the flow to really come in and then playing the flow move, as opposed to just trying to interpret the odds and interpret the change at that point. So we'll move on and go and have a look at this was the move, this was the opportunity that we just seen come through 55, 75. Big lesson there, don't give up on it just because it doesn't go immediately. Once you get that second move through 75, then you get the flow. And the other thing, in high volatility environments, market will put in much, much larger moves than you would ordinarily expect. This takes about 10 minutes to put in a move of around about 50 handles with zero pullback. Never takes out the low of the previous 1 minute candle. So what did we learn from the overnight? Because this was still ongoing come the end of the night. Overnight, we learned that the final result wouldn't be clear for some time. And so therefore, individual states were now going to be important. We had predominantly the swing states left. The other thing we learned is markets were nowhere near as binary as previous. And this more like previous elections, aside from the 2016. Not this sort of complete binary, Trump bad, Biden good. In a sense, it almost at some point seemed that whatever the result was, this was generally equity market positive. The split House and Senate was pretty much concluded by the end of the evening, and the big opportunities were more on the flow-based move. And like I say, the binary element was not so much there because risk off on Trump was not necessarily the obvious play anymore, particularly as when the odds switched, Trump didn't, or we didn't then see the S&P dropping, T-note rallying. Instead, we saw the opposite. So we're then on to a question of what comes next. We know that Trump's going to speak at 7:30 in the morning. We also know that we're still waiting on certain states to report. So what we then see the next day, this is from 7 a.m. to midday. We see Trump has a press conference where he suggests that he has won and calls for the voting to stop. And we also start seeing a swing, particularly in Michigan. And Michigan became the big state to watch. And what you need to be doing there is also looking at the individual counties. What are the big counties that are yet to report? Because that's going to be what can swing the vote. At this point, at 7 a.m., we were looking at about 52% for Trump of the current counted vote and 46% for Biden. But importantly, at that point, Wayne County hadn't reported. So it's the bigger counties reporting that can switch this. By the time, or by midday, we actually get Michigan is starting to drift towards Biden, 49 to 49.4. And by the end of the night, Michigan was won by Biden. So this switch was quite telling. This really told you where the focal point was. This is what we then got. This is Michigan swinging back towards Biden, and you start to get this risk on type move. Dollar then starts to weaken, T-note starts to sell off as it becomes clear that the market is pretty happy with Biden winning. You take this over to the S&P and you get the same kind of story. Early on, we get this dip. This was around about 7:30 in the morning as Trump claims victory, despite the fact that they haven't called Michigan or Wisconsin, two of the states that Biden ends up winning. But Trump claims victory there. That sends the S&P down. So it is an indication that after all has been said and done in the overnight, Trump is still marginally seen as bad news for the market. Biden taking Michigan once again provides this kind of flow-based reversal back again from that 33, 73, 75 zone and takes us back up. And this has then continued, partly a bit of a relief rally after the recent sell-off anyway. So what can we take from all of this? What can we take going into the next election, both from personal experiences and also from speaking to and seeing how a lot of our traders performed? Key takeaways here. Don't overemphasize the result of every single state, particularly when it's not such a clean-cut binary decision. This wasn't like Trump-Clinton. This was a different situation. And by doing this, I think many people miss the opportunity to take on the more flow-based trade, particularly that S&P reversal. Those who weren't waiting for each stage of news were able to get onto that. You get this clear flow-driven move, and once you start getting the flow coming in, so you start seeing consistent bid up or consistent sell off, that's where you get these larger moves coming from. And if you can sort of step back from the immediate focus on what state's getting this, constantly checking odds, and focus on what's trading in the market, there were some of the best opportunities purely there. Also, if this is something that starts to happen in future, we could well see that, as we saw yesterday, so the day after the election, the prolonged process giving more opportunities. Because by the time we got to yesterday afternoon, in the UK at least, we only had a few states to report, and we knew that they were important. They were the ones that were going to tip this election. So all of a sudden, you could then go back to trading state by state. And the other final takeaway from this, which many of us had done at the previous election as well, betting markets can give some of the strongest indications. You need to put these next to the flow of what's going on as well. It's not just purely a case of, right, certain betting markets are tipping towards Trump, therefore sell the S&P, because that didn't work. You've got to look at the change and then look at how market flows coming in. But betting markets can give you a very good indication. Well worth doing a detailed debrief of this. Go back and look at the times that states reported as well. This can give you a slight edge at the next election. Of course, they won't do it the same every time. But make sure you spend the time to go back through this. Go back through it in as much detail as you can as well. And review it in a couple of weeks' time to really imprint that information in your head. This way, come 4 years' time, you'll feel more confident. You'll be more of an expert on this than someone coming into this trying to recreate the tables and scenarios and all of the rest of it for the next election.